Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. U.S. stocks recovering from a slide at the close, ending the day flat. Apple shares on the move throughout the day as the company unveiled a slew of new products, also ending the day just in the green. Apple adding 3 new Apple Watches to its portfolio, including a more affordable version, new iPads, and new subscription services, bundling its music, TV, gaming, and news offerings along with iCloud, as well as a new fitness service called Fitness Plus, which will work in tandem with the watch. This as Oracle's bid for TikTok undergoes a U.S. national security review. Oracle's proposal does not offer compensation to the U.S. government that President Trump has demanded, but does promise to create 20,000 new jobs. How? That's a question we'll explore in a moment. But first, joining us to talk about the movers of the day, Bloomberg's Sarah Ponczek. Tech was up on the day, Sarah, but also more volatile. Why is that?
Yes, that is true. So another strong day for markets, the third straight day of gains for the S&P. The NASDAQ, we have the second straight day of gains of more than 1%. And as you mentioned, a strong day for tech. You look at some of the biggest contributors to the gains today. Your classic FANG names, the likes of Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, for example. This even after the likes of Kim Kardashian herself said that she was going to freeze her Instagram and Facebook accounts starting tomorrow, asking others to join her. Facebook still at more than 2%. Microsoft, after missing out on that Oracle bid, still staging a nice gain of 1.6% today. So yes, we are still dealing with the fallback, with the aftermath of the NASDAQ falling into a correction. We have to keep in mind the NASDAQ's still about 8% or so off a record, but when you still look at the year of 2020 and the performance that tech has had, it's pretty unbelievable.
Let's talk a little bit about Apple. First it was up and then it was down, then ending the day about flat. Talk to us a little bit about how investors responded. Obviously, we know Apple's had a huge run, a bit more struggles when it comes to the stocks in the last couple of weeks on the back of that 4-for-1 split. What did you see?
Right. Apple shares are still up 57% year to date. So 57% in 2020. That is an unbelievable gain, especially considering the fact that we are living through a pandemic and AI recession. Here you see those intraday moves. Up, then down, closing just about 0.2% higher. But you have to say, after the run that we've seen in 2020, that still could count as a win. When it comes to launch days, really it has been no sure thing. You look at performance on launch days in the past. Some days you've seen gains of more than 1%. Some days you've seen losses of more than 1%. There you can see examples from years prior. Of course, we did learn more about those subscription bundles, also Fitness Plus, a new watch, an iPad Air, but there really were no major surprises, it seems. But still, Apple shares a little bit higher on the day. You'd call that a win considering the run that we've seen.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about Apple now. Bloomberg's Sarah Ponczek, thank you so much for joining us to talk a bit more about the product launches. Dan Morgan of Synovus Trust, Senior Portfolio Manager there, joins us now. So Dan, I want to start with the watch. Apple opened the event today, really playing up the health features of the watch. Tim Cook talking about the pandemic and obviously the impact that it's had on all of us. We've got 3 new watches, 2 new, brand new watches, the Series 6, and also a cheaper watch, the Watch SE, as well as a new sensor to track blood oxygen levels. What are the highlights to you?
Well, Emily, the watch has been one of the fastest growing segments for Apple. As we know, over the last 3 years, we've had about a 40% growth in terms of unit volume. It represents almost 50% of the wearables segment, which is a growing area for Apple. If you kind of break out those watches, they came out with the new Series 6, like you mentioned before, which is a little more higher priced watch. And then they kind of followed suit with what they had done in the past with their iPhones previously announcing some cheaper, which they call the SE. So they have one, I think it's at a lower price point for them. So I think what it shows to me and shows to investors, Emily, is the emphasis on that particular category and the fact that it is a good growth area for them. It's been a very hot segment. So why not come out and introduce some new watches, especially as we get closer to the holiday season. So it should be a positive, obviously, for them to complement, hopefully, the big news, right, which is the 5G phone, which everybody's waiting on.
Absolutely. We are waiting for that in October. No news about the iPhone today, but that is as we expected. What's your take on the increased fitness offerings here, the Fitness Plus service that will work with the Apple Watch in a move, it seems, to take on Peloton? But by the way, no other equipment needed other than the watch.
Yeah, so it's interesting, Emily. They're coming out, at $9.95 per month, a very similar offering than Peloton in terms of workouts and different music and all these other different things. So it's basically showing that there is money to be made in that segment, and Apple has recognized that. We know Peloton went public in the last year or so. It's had some success. So it just kind of shows the demand for that type of product. And obviously, Apple can work it into their existing watch. So why not go ahead and bring something out like that? So I thought that was a positive. It's kind of add-on to the services segment, right? They came out with a bundle on that. So it's kind of an attachment to that, I think, in terms of recognizing that the exercise market is very important, and it definitely ties into the watch, like you said, blood oxygen indicators and so forth.
Moving on to the iPads, we're definitely seeing Apple run with this idea of every product being a family of products. We've got a new iPad Air with the fastest processor ever to be in an iPad on top of the iPad Pro and the iPad 8, which is now a cheaper version that might be more attractive for children. For example, the iPad line has had such an interesting history and really has made kind of a comeback in recent years. What's your take?
Well, you're exactly right, Emily. If we go back and look at the third quarter, iPads were up over 30%. They were up 31% in revenues. And like you just said, this is a group or a segment that was kind of like become almost commoditized, right? It wasn't growing very fast. It was a very slow, mature growth category for them, like the Macs. And all of a sudden, third quarter, bing, we have this huge jump up. Most of that related, obviously, to the work from home and so forth, and people wanting a device that's very inexpensive that they can access and do all these different things with. So I think it's a good positive for them. Again, following suit like they did with the watch. You mentioned before they came out with a lower priced one in terms of an iPad. And then they kind of upped the game with features, right, in terms of iPad Air, not quite like an iPad Pro, but adding different things and caveats to the product to be able to allow people to get a good price point. I think they said $599 on that. So again, like the watch, Emily, preparing for the upcoming holiday season and kind of setting the stage for the two fastest or some of the fastest growing categories for them, the watch and the iPad, at least based on the last quarter.
And then also doubling down on services and trying to use their hardware success to drive more services revenue with this new Apple One subscription, which will include iCloud, music, TV, the gaming, Apple Arcade, as well as Apple News. This has been billed as Apple's sort of twist on Amazon Prime. Apple's not advertising it that way, but that's how analysts have viewed this. How significant do you think this could be as a revenue driver? I mean, is there any comparison to Prime?
Well, there is, Emily. I mean, obviously, you Prime, you're $118, $120 per year. You get unlimited shipping. You get access to the TV and so forth. So again, I think they're trying to do the same thing, right? They've got all these different services, as you mentioned before, and they're trying to put them together for $19.95 per month in terms of competing directly against, let's say, an Amazon. So I think it is a good way to go. I think the only thing missing, Emily, is I remember last year we had this conference. They spent a lot of time talking about Apple TV. I don't know if you remember that. They introduced the $4.99 per month service. Everybody got excited. Everybody was thinking they were going to beat out Netflix. But then it kind of turned out they didn't put a lot of money into new content and production and budgets and so forth. So it'll be interesting, though, with this new bundle where they kind of renew that interest in Apple TV and start to be more proactive in terms of coming up with their own content and trying to go really head-to-head against like a Netflix.
All right, Dan, always good to have you on the show. We're going to talk a little bit more
Thank you, Emily.
about Apple later on. Dan Morgan, Senior Portfolio Manager at Synovus. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us. Coming up, Oracle's bid for TikTok under national security review. At this very moment, it is not a done deal. There is one big thing missing that the president has asked for: compensation to the U.S. government. We're going to dig in with the latest next. This is Bloomberg.
I have a high respect for Larry Ellison. He's somebody I know. He's been really a terrific guy for a long time. So we're going to take a look. I heard they're very close to a deal, and we'll be looking at the TikTok deal with Larry Ellison and Oracle.
President Trump there earlier today talking Oracle and TikTok, saying the company is very, quote, close to a deal, but there are still a lot of open questions. As that national security review is underway, we're joined now by Shelley Banjo, who's been covering every step of the twists and turns here. Shelley, tell us the very latest on the review that's happening by the U.S. government. It's actually a two-track review, and then Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has promised the president a decision or a recommendation later this week.
That's right, Emily. So everything and the fate of this company, no surprise here, is going to be put into the hands of Donald Trump pretty soon. We know that members of the U.S. National Security Panel that were reviewing this bid have met today, and they were going to decide whether or not to recommend that the president approve or reject the deal. At the same time, yet a number of higher-up members from the administration, Mnuchin, Kushner, come out and really talk it up ahead of time, and it's still unclear whether or not it's going to pass, particularly because nothing in this deal that we know so far resembles anything that Donald Trump had asked for in the first place.
So the president has demanded compensation to the U.S. government. As we understand it, that is not included in Oracle's proposal, but Oracle has promised to create 20,000 new jobs. A, how is the president going to react when he finds out that this compensation is not part of the deal? B, how can TikTok create 20,000 new jobs? I mean, Snapchat only has some 3,000.
Yeah, so the answer to your first question, I think, is something spinnable. If you say, 20,000 jobs equals X amount of tax revenue for the United States, you could really peg a number on that Trump could bandy around and kind of claim that as his key money, even though there won't actually be a sum of money that is being discussed on the table right now to go to the U.S. government. That was something already that lawyers and others who fought this, security review processes were really confounded from the beginning. But what it does do is it kind of throws a bone, gives Donald Trump something to talk about next week when he's doing, the debate for the presidential elections. How they're going to create 20,000 jobs, a completely other story. The two areas that it would come in primarily would be something like content moderation. There's thousands of people every day that is going through all of these websites and, removing offensive content. A lot of these jobs, companies like Facebook and Snapchat outsource. Right now, at least, ByteDance, TikTok's parent, has a lot of these people in-house. And in China, they have more than 10,000 people doing this. And so that's one area. The other is they're building out all sorts of capabilities around e-commerce and advertising sales. So if you think of TikTok trying to become like a mashup of Google and Facebook and Amazon, then you can kind of start to see where those jobs come from.
So what is next? We've got this recommendation potentially coming from Mnuchin before the end of the week, and then the president has until September 20th, and he could still completely block this deal, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so whatever CFIUS recommends to the president can still turn around and say, no, I don't want that. I want an outright sale, and send everybody back to the drawing board. If that happens, it could certainly take more than 5 days to work out such a deal. It sounds right now, by the words that Trump is saying about praising Larry Ellison, Oracle's chairman, and Steve Mnuchin and Jared Kushner are all coming out in support of this, that it sounds like they're all getting on board, even though, I would have to just reiterate that this is not a sale of the company. It is just Oracle taking a stake in it with ByteDance, the Chinese parent, retaining majority ownership.
All right, Shelley Banjo, thank you so much. We'll check back in with you later this week as this continues to play out. Meantime, investors are closely watching how the TikTok saga continues to unfold. One of them is Greylock Partners, which invested in Musical.ly before it became TikTok. Greylock just announced a new $1 billion fund to invest in startups. Partner and LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman joined us in an exclusive interview to talk about their strategy in the midst of such great geopolitical and economic uncertainty. We're going to have more on that later in the show. But first, he's also on the board of Microsoft. I asked Hoffman for his thoughts on Microsoft losing the bid, Oracle in top position, and the president basically forcing a deal.
Greylock invested in Musical.ly, which was bought by ByteDance, so we are shareholders in ByteDance. Look, I think that what you're really seeing here is the very first place where we are now moving into a much more multipolar tech world, where the tech companies from China aren't only doing services for China, right? Because, part of the reason why there was this amazing company, Tencent, that does WeChat, and WeChat we learn all kinds of things from as technologists, but hadn't really come over to the U.S. much, other than people who had worked with China or kind of other kinds of exposure. But I think what we're now going to see is technology invented in China with global scope that is going to be contending with the other kind of global tech companies, which we in the U.S. have been so lucky for decades to have a kind of a broadly kind of free run. And I think that now it's the ringing of the bell. The competition's here. Now, personally, I don't think that the right response is to kind of go to a kind of a protectionist. Now, I do think that there's an issue. China does protectionism against its own tech industry, and how do you balance that out is, I think, important. I actually think, building bridges versus walls is, I think, generally, again, a pro-business, right, kind of approach, as well as a pro-humanity approach. But that's how I kind of look at it. And so I think we've heard the first ring of the bell, and we've had the first awkward response. But what we're going to see a lot more of is tech companies from China becoming globally competitive.
So you think that Chinese technology is becoming more of a threat to American technology?
Yes. Like, which platforms are going to establish the platforms of the future? Because, when you look at it, you say, okay, a lot of messaging products, obviously we have tended to make those global messaging products, generally speaking, within the West Coast of the United States. Well, here you've got this amazing set of technology from kind of TikTok that is kind of having, how do you onboard someone and find videos that they want to watch and have them kind of being, oh my God, this is like the next generation of television and entertainment, and how do you do that? And TikTok figured it out before any other company, or ByteDance figured it out before any other company in the world.
We're going to have much more from Greylock partner Reid Hoffman later in the show. All right, coming up, Facebook unveils a new information hub in addition to hubs already focused on COVID-19 and the upcoming election. Kim Kardashian West, meantime, also moving markets with her latest posts, scrutinizing Facebook, all of that. Coming up, this is Bloomberg. Facebook has offered itself as a resource for accurate information about everything from COVID to knowing how and where to vote in the upcoming election. Now, it's adding climate change to that list. With us now on the phone, Kurt Wagner, who covers Facebook for us. Facebook, Kurt, unveiling a new climate hub, just like it has with COVID-19 and voting. How well is this push to provide accurate information rather than taking down misinformation about all of these things actually working?
We don't have great stats to back up whether or not this works, but Facebook clearly thinks that it does. And we spoke with Nick Clegg, who's the head of policy at Facebook, and he said that the reason that they decided to go with a climate change hub was because they've seen so much success with the COVID-19 hub and the voting information section that they launched. So they feel like this is a way to kind of walk the line of not feeling that they have to police every single post that's on the platform around misleading info, and still give people a chance to go somewhere where they can get some credible information to kind of counterbalance perhaps some of the stuff that they see in their feed.
Of course, this is very top of mind for us here on the West Coast. As these fires have continued to rage, we're going on our, a month of bad air here. Also now in Oregon, in Washington, and there has been misinformation about the fires and climate just in the last few weeks tied to this. I do want to talk to you about Kim Kardashian joining the Stop Hate for Profit campaign. A tweet from her earlier today saying, "I love that I can connect directly with you through Instagram and Facebook, but I can't sit by and stay silent while these platforms continue to allow the spreading of hate, propaganda, and misinformation created by groups to sow division and split America apart." She just one of a few celebrities who will be freezing their Instagram and Facebook accounts tomorrow as part of the Stop Hate for Profit campaigns. How big a deal is it that Kim is adding her name to this in addition to, Sacha Baron Cohen, Katy Perry, Naomi Campbell? Obviously the Kardashians have a lot of power on social media.
Yeah, Kim has 188 million Instagram followers. So when she posts something or chooses not to post something, she usually gets attention from a lot of people. So I think this is a great get for these activists who have been trying to really make change. This is the same group, by the way, that was leading the ad boycott from July that we talked a lot about, of course. So this is kind of the next wave of that. We did actually see Facebook stock take a little dip this afternoon when Kim tweeted. That kind of gives you a sense of how people are taking her voice and participation in this pretty seriously. I think ultimately it's going to take a lot more than just one day of not posting on Instagram. But Facebook notices this kind of stuff, and Instagram certainly does as well. And when you have someone of her kind of stature involved in something like this, it will definitely require reaching out and talking to people about what Facebook is doing, which I think is an important thing for them to have to do.
I'm reminded of the time that Kylie Jenner tweeted about Snapchat and wiped $1 billion off Snapchat's market cap. So that shows you the power of one Kardashian-related tweet. We're going to be following just how widespread the campaign is tomorrow. Kurt Wagner for us. Thanks so much for your reporting there. Coming up, we're going to have more of Reid Hoffman, how he believes the U.S. economy will fare after getting hit by the asteroid that has been COVID-19. Greylock just announcing a huge new fund, their strategy. Next, this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, getting back to Apple's product launch from earlier today. No iPhones this time around, but the company unveiled a series of subscription bundles, a long-awaited move that Wall Street hopes will spur more growth in services revenue, as well as new watches and iPads. For more, I want to bring in Julie Osk of Forrester Research. Julie, you've got a very nuanced take on all of these announcements. I want to start with the watch and, of course, Apple playing up the healthcare aspects of these new watches and how critical the watch has thus far been to driving more health awareness. How significant or what is most significant in your view about these watch reveals?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing here is that Apple is making strong moves to move beyond their core base of what I would call affluent, healthy athletes. This combination of lower price points, healthcare measurements, right, family programs, features that appeal to children, workouts for beginners, are all going to help them attract a broader audience. Their core audience today, I would say, is still too small. And I think the other thing that's really important here is Apple has always had an aspiration of playing a significant role in the healthcare space. So doing things like adding blood oxygen and being able to measure that checks another box for them and gives them even a bigger role that could go beyond heart disease and puts them on track to become more part of people's day-to-day lives.
So, where does Apple go from here when it comes to the watch? They've sort of put a lot of, the gears, if you will, in place to, make this something bigger. But obviously, there's potential that needs to be realized.
Yeah, so I think in terms of where we go from here, it's going to probably take an even lower price point to get out to consumers. If we're talking about getting to critical mass at 20% or mass market at 50%. I think also one of the things on the list and where they're clearly headed is doing a better job of presenting consumers with insights and then nudging them to act on those insights. So it's not simply that, hey, my blood pressure is high or my heart rate is high, but hey, you're probably on the verge of cardiac arrest. You should go to a hospital. The second thing we talked about is really, again, driving broader adoption at lower price points. I don't know that they're going to be able to do this on their own. They may need to depend here on their broader ecosystem and either payers or healthcare providers or even the U.S. government deciding, for those on Medicare and Medicaid, that wearing an Apple Watch or some kind of a smartwatch like that has a positive ROI in terms of driving down the cost. And then I think the third thing, Emily, is if we tap into the services bundles that they're rolling out, just continuing to provide a seamless, services experience across all of their devices. While Apple may not be number one in terms of the number of users in Apple in TV or in music or games and so forth, we know they have very high-quality services, a customer base that skews affluent, and then the seamless, operability or use of the services across their hardware platform, including the watch, is going to continue to serve them well.
So how are you expecting this all to play out in the holiday quarter? Obviously, we are expecting new iPhones to be unveiled next month. It's typically, a booming quarter, the last quarter of the year for Apple through the holidays. They've got these new offerings, these new subscription bundles, but, also we're in a really difficult economic time with so many people having lost their jobs and really struggling as much as they need these devices to keep themselves connected. What is your outlook?
Yes, I think there's twofold here. I think on one hand, there's the total cost, right, of providing healthcare, providing education, and Apple and others like it that are building consumer electronics, I think are going to continue to do well because it's necessary for folks to get access to services remotely. And then I think certainly bundling their services, as well as the free 30 days up front and the trial periods, also give consumers an opportunity to trial the services at a lower price point, and then hopefully they'll stick with them once they get the opportunity to experiment with them.
All right, Julie Osk of Forrester Research, thank you as always for sharing your insights with us. Apple, of course, one of the most successful companies in the world and perhaps in history, as we see by its $2 trillion market cap. The venture capital firm Greylock Partners, meantime, just raised another $1 billion to invest in what they hope will be the next generation of big tech companies. Greylock partner and LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman told us in an exclusive interview this has been the strangest year of his life, yet they are striking plenty of deals, sometimes with founders they've never met in person. I asked for his outlook on the economy and how the pandemic will play out for Silicon Valley.
It's very strange because we have, on one hand, this kind of accelerated stock market due to fiscal policies and a bunch of other stuff, and yet an asteroid has hit the economy. And there's segments of the economy that, my heart goes out to people in those industries, whether it's, retail or any of these other kinds of things that is just lots and lots of pain and suffering across, a lot of the workforce. Can they make rent, and what's happening with jobs, what's happening with SMBs, what's happening with restaurants. And, to some degree, I've started thinking about what would a new deal for, for getting restaurants restarted and SMBs restarted and how would we do that? Because it's really important for all of these things. On the other hand, when you're in the tech space, the part of this thing is most of what's happening is this massive acceleration in terms of digital transformation. I mean, 2 months into the crisis and into the pandemic, Satya Nadella noted, is look, we've seen 2 years of advance in digital transformation in 2 months, right? Because we all have to work with these tools now. We all have to live with these tools. This is the thing that's making it happen. So generally speaking, with these funds, that's part of the reason why raising a fund is relatively straightforward in this environment is because, well, we're already working towards that. What does that future look like?
Are you saying you think that tech won't be impacted? I mean, obviously we've seen a big sell-off in the public markets. We have seen a bunch of private tech companies lay off parts of their workforce as well.
Some tech will be impacted, even though the broad thing, because tech's about building into the future and accelerating the future, many tech companies are like this asteroid, the smoke cloud is also the accelerating into the needs of the future. And so, the tech companies are acquiring more customers, the like interviews now being done, in video conference, all of these different tools are all kind of being accelerated. Now, I think some of the early layoffs and all the rest was also kind of a combination of we're going to have volatility and uncertainty, and how do you prep for it? And how do you focus on the kinds of things that you're doing in order to reset? And I think a lot of those resets have happened. And I think a lot of the tech companies are now kind of, said, okay, we did the reset, and now we're actually getting back to trying to plan out to the future, right? And I think that's more the truth than layoffs within the tech industry.
You mentioned Airbnb. You're a board observer there. CEO Brian Chesky told me that no matter what happens, travel will never be the same. Never, ever is what he said. They're now planning to go public, and there's an argument to be made that Airbnb should have gone public sooner. But why go public now, and how is the company actually doing at this point?
Well, so I think, when a company goes public, it generally speaking has recovered its footing, and it's it sees a vision of the future. I think one of the things that when you look at the kind of thing that Airbnb brings, which is a network and a community, allows it to be adaptive to when needs change, when markets change. Like travel is changed now, but people go, okay, well, maybe I don't do as much international travel, but actually maybe I do domestic travel at 200 to 600 miles. I still want to get a different experience, to have a break from my life. In order to do that, and how can I do it in a way that isn't like lots and lots and lots of people in one big building, where maybe I have to go up and down elevators with a bunch of other people because of the pandemic. It's like, oh, I can rent a house, and networks allow hosts to be adaptive, so they can say, hey, here's the things we're doing for the pandemic. Here's what we're doing for domestic travel.
Now, you've publicly supported Joe Biden for president, and I'm curious, with the election coming up, if Biden wins, what does that mean for tech and business? And what if Trump remains in office?
If you actually go to your average business person and you say, would you rather have a stable environment with more of a unified society with higher taxes, right? Not obviously crazy higher taxes, but higher taxes, or would you rather have lower taxes and everything falling apart? Every business person is going to say, I'll take door A, please, not door B.
At the same time, you've got this administration and Congress from both sides of the aisle training their eyes on big tech, Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, facing this unprecedented antitrust scrutiny. Do you think these companies need to be broken up, especially now given the China threat that you're laying out? And what's the path forward for them?
So I'm a strong opponent to the breakup, because I do think, just as I described, we're in globally competition, and you want our competitors to be strong. It isn't just a question of what happens within the U.S. And I, by the way, look, I'm a venture capitalist. I invest in startups that compete with these companies. Like, if I thought that was the suppression of startups, then I would have a potentially a moderately different answer. But I actually think there's lots of room for startups. There's lots of rooms for starting new companies, even as these large companies continue to compound at scale. And I think you need to look at global competition as part of it. Now, that doesn't mean, kind of like, oh, just let the companies do whatever they want. We need to figure out, as opposed to say break up, stop, whatever. We need to say, how do we harness? How do we shape it? So, for example, you say, well, we'd like to have manufacturing jobs back in this country as part of middle-class jobs, and how do we make that happen? Well, the answer is, well, technology. How do we do robotics the right way? Can we get robotics in order to get the right kind of manufacturing jobs? We say, so as opposed to saying stop, break, et cetera, say, these are outcomes that we want more of. These are outcomes we want less of. How do we then make that happen? Now, then the next question is, well, is that regulation? Well, maybe it's regulation, but the usual thing of, like, you create a regulatory agency that has someone says, don't do anything until I tell you it's okay to do. That's not a very good globally competitive stance.
Reid Hoffman there, LinkedIn co-founder and partner at Greylock Partners. We're going to have more of that conversation later in the week. Coming up, software maker Snowflake is giving investors a rare opportunity to disrupt Amazon as competition heats up among cloud providers. A preview of Snowflake's public debut. We're expecting it tomorrow. Next. This is Bloomberg. Snowflake is riding a wave of enthusiasm leading to its expected IPO tomorrow, highlighting optimism that the young cloud computing company can hold its own against the industry's toughest rivals. For more, I want to bring in Dina Bass from Bloomberg's Seattle Bureau, our Seattle Bureau chief. In fact, Dina, tell us how Snowflake is giving companies like Amazon some stiffer competition.
Sure. You know, one of the reasons for the massive enthusiasm about Snowflake is exactly what you just mentioned. It's one of the few companies that operates in a cloud space where rather than chasing Amazon, it's actually going in the other direction. Snowflake's really giving Amazon a run for their money. And in fact, last year at Amazon's big cloud conference, a lot of their major announcements had to do with updating and upgrading their own competing products so that it's better able to compete with Snowflake. And that's unusual. In most parts of the cloud market, it goes the other direction. Everyone wants to match Amazon.
So how optimistic are investors about Snowflake? We've been covering the fact that it seemed like the IPO window was locked shut, and now it is open, and you've got this flurry, pun intended, of companies coming out of the gate, including Snowflake. How attractive do you think this offering is going to be to investors in this environment?
Well, they bumped their IPO price range up to $100 to $110 a share from $75 to $85. Part of the deal is also a private placement at the same time by where Berkshire Hathaway and Salesforce both snapped up stakes in Snowflake. And, I think that gives you a sense of how enthusiastic investors are about this deal, with a lot of people trying to get into it in the last minute. The company just is, it both competes with and partners with Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, the biggest cloud providers. But they've managed to take a lot of customers from those guys by, creating a product that's better. And, Snowflake's CEO, Frank Slootman, told me last year that because most of the cloud users are on Amazon, in order to get business, his product has to be better than Amazon's competing Redshift every day, or people wouldn't switch. They would just use the AWS product. And so that's been their real focus. And the fact that they've been able to take customers is a real vote of confidence in their technology. And that's what investors are seeing as attractive.
All right. Well, obviously, we're going to be covering Snowflake coming out of the gate tomorrow. Bloomberg's Dina Bass, thank you so much for weighing in there. A big week for IPOs, a couple of other companies coming out of the gate as well, which we will be watching. Still ahead, with millions continuing to work from home, just how secure is all your data? Well, it's more vulnerable than ever. We're going to talk about it with CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz next. This is Bloomberg. As millions of people around the world are still working from home, including yours truly, more bad actors continue to take advantage of more vulnerable company networks. The cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike has seen an explosion in cyber attacks in the first half of the year. Manufacturing and telecom industries, two popular targets. Joining us now for more on their new findings, CrowdStrike CEO and co-founder George Kurtz. So, George, I know the cyber landscape is always busy. Just how much more activity, how many more threats are you seeing right now?
Well, just to give you a sense, this year, the first half of the year, we saw and stopped 41,000 hands-on keyboard breaches, and those are people behind the breaches trying to get into to companies. All of last year was 35,000. So we've seen an explosion in just the interactive nature of trying to get into companies, and a lot of it was driven by e-crime and ransomware as a service.
So talk to us about the biggest threats that you see and where specifically you're seeing acceleration.
Well, in particular, we are seeing e-crime just continue to up their game. And what we've seen over the last number of years is that the e-crime actors who are focused on monetizing their access and the bad things they do have really taken it to the next level. They've taken a lot of the sophisticated techniques that we've seen from nation state actors, and they've applied it to their craft. So in the past, you might have gotten a phishing lure that said click here and your PC got encrypted. Today, we're actually seeing e-crime actors break into networks, strategically place the malware just as a nation state actor would break in as they traverse the network, and then activate that malware and then charge much more in terms of the ransom. Rather than $300 a PC, it could be several millions of dollars for large companies to unencrypt their data.
I want to zero in on China. Obviously, we've seen an increasingly frosty relationship between the U.S. and China. Some folks on this show have called it the beginning of a new Cold War. We are seeing this TikTok situation continue with new twists and turns every day. How is that being translated in the cyber landscape? Obviously, we know that hackers, linked to China are always very active. What kind of fresh activity are you seeing?
Well, if you think about the period of time that we're in, there's nothing more relevant than any information on COVID-19. And that could be anything from therapeutics. It could be, research into the actual vaccine. It could be the vaccine itself. So it's the one universal topic that everyone's concerned about. And certainly in the past, and we continue to see this, is China's been very active in the theft of intellectual property. So, from our standpoint, the environment continues to get worse. And it gets worse because people are not even in the office, right? They're trying to protect a lot of these systems with legacy technologies, and they're out of the office. And the nation state actors have been very, very good and are sophisticated in getting into these companies and stealing that critical intellectual property.
Do you have national security concerns about TikTok?
Well, from a TikTok perspective, I don't really use it. I don't know much about it other than some of my kids use it. And I think at the end of the day, I'll let the politicians sort that out. But when we think about any of these large service providers and the information they actually have, it's incredibly valuable. And a lot of it is private information. So kind of gets back to how they're protecting that and ensuring that it's not being used for malicious purposes or falls into the wrong hands. So I think going through that exercise and just understanding that is certainly something that, is a good thing to understand. And we'll leave it to the politicians to figure out how they want to deal with TikTok.
Speaking of the politicians, we've got a big election coming up. How concerned are you about the vulnerability of this election, given that so much of it is going to happen by mail, if people can get to their mailboxes?
Well, we've been voting by mail for a long time. And I think when you look at the overall exposure, whether it's mail or cyber, it's something we have to be concerned with, right? How do we make sure we can, protect the integrity of the election? And that's everything from the physical world to the electronic world. And I think at least in 2020, there's a much more heightened awareness of the dangers that are out there on the cyber side. And, it's incumbent for whether it's a federal government, local, state and governments to make sure they protect those critical assets, both in the electronic world as well as the physical world.
Now, we've got a host of IPOs coming this week, including Snowflake. We're also expecting Unity, JFrog, CrowdStrike recently went public. Do you have any advice for folks coming out of the gate, especially in such an uncertain environment?
Well, last year we went public, and I think the timing was fantastic. We were able to get out and perform well. And, this year it was interesting. The beginning of the year, who knew if the IPOs were going to get out? And it certainly seems to be a hot market. I think there are a lot of quality companies out there like Snowflake and others. So, it's exciting for me to watch to see how they're received. But I think, from an investor standpoint, there's some real high quality companies out there. SaaS-based recurring revenues like CrowdStrike, high growth rates. And I think investors have a big appetite for that.
Now, given that this working from home thing is probably going to go on for some time, and you have companies like Twitter, for example, saying employees can work from home forever if they want, you sell to enterprises, but what can we as employees and individuals do when we are trying to get our work done from home and use our company systems, but sometimes it's difficult to log on, it takes more time. What are some best practices for folks in a remote work environment?
Sure. Well, first of all, when we think about work from home, we actually have a broader view, which is work from anywhere. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know we're not going to go back to the way we were doing things, right? So this work from anywhere is a broader concept than just work from home. And we see a lot of companies embracing that. I think on the employee side, it's important to just maintain your vigilance, right? Just think about what you're clicking. You know, we've seen a lot of lures in the past on COVID-19 and making them look like they came from employers. So, you know, see something, say something, I think is the best advice. And on the corporate side, you know, as people move to a digital transformation strategy, they have to transform their security architecture. You can't have digital transformation without security transformation. And that's where a company like CrowdStrike comes in to protect those remote workers that are at home using next-gen technology and also protect those cloud workloads. And I think that's really important as we go through this process. And we see a much more sustainable trend in digital transformation over the coming years because people will either have to transform or die. And I think that's the harsh reality of the current environment that we're in.
All right, CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz, always good to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for stopping by and warning us about the threats that are still out there. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia is coming up. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.